This is the story of a man whose name made entire regiments tremble, a soldier who became the living embodiment of winter terror, and a humble Finnish farmer who single-handedly changed the world's understanding of what one man with a rifle can achieve. The winter of 1939 in Northern Europe was one of the harshest in recorded history. Temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees below zero, and the icy wind cut through the bones of even the most hardened warriors. It was in this frozen wasteland, amidst the snow-laden forests of Karelia, that the legend of the White Death was born. Simo Häyhä was not a professional soldier in the traditional sense. Born in the small village of Rotchervi, near what is now the border with Russia, he grew up in a family of simple farmers. His childhood and youth were spent tilling the earth and hunting in the vast and forgiving northern woods. It was hunting that became his true academia school that no military institution could ever replicate. From a young age, Simo learned to read tracks, to understand the language of the forest, to wait for hours in total stillness, and, most importantly, to strike without missing. He didn't just shoot, he felt his rifle as an extension of his own body, a tool of survival as natural to him as breathing. When the Soviet Union launched its massive offensive against Finland in November 1939, Simo, like thousands of his compatriots, went to defend his homeland. He was assigned to the 6th Company of the 34th Infantry Regiment, holding the line at the Kala River. The situation seemed hopeless. Facing a handful of Finnish soldiers were the colossal forces of the Red Army, equipped with tanks, heavy artillery, and overwhelming numbers. But the Finns knew their forests, and Simo knew how to turn those forests into a lethal trap. From his very first days at the front, Simo began to demonstrate an almost supernatural effectiveness. He made a choice that many found baffling. He refused to use a telescopic sight on his mosinnagant M28-30 rifle. For a sniper, this seemed like madness, as optics allow for better visibility and longer range. But Häyhä had his own calculations, rooted in years of hunting experience. First, a glass lens would instantly fog up or frost over in the extreme cold, becoming useless. Second, the glint of the sun on the lens could betray a sniper's position to the enemy. Third, using a scope required the shooter to lift his head a few centimeters higher, making him a vulnerable target for counter-snipers. Simo preferred iron sights. He merged with the landscape so perfectly that an enemy soldier could pass within a few meters of him and never notice the ghost hidden in the snow. His preparation for a mission was a meticulous ritual. He wore a heavy white camouflage suit that made him invisible against the drifts, to prevent the steam from his breath from giving him away in the freezing air. He would keep snow in his mouth. Before his position, he would pack down the snow into a dense wall so that the muzzle blast wouldn't kick up a cloud of powder and reveal his location. Day after day, in the gray twilight of the Arctic winter, the White Death went out to hunt. His efficiency was terrifying. On some days, he was credited with dozens of kills. Soviet soldiers began to whisper about a specter that killed silently and from nowhere. Panic spread through the ranks. The Red Army Command, alarmed by the staggering losses among their officers, began a targeted hunt for the Finnish sniper. At first, they sent groups of their own best marksmen, but Simo picked them off one by one, using his superior knowledge of the terrain and his iron patience. Then, the Soviets began to rain artillery fire on any square of forest where they suspected he might be hiding. Shells churned the snow and splintered ancient pines into toothpicks, turning the forest into a hellish landscape of fire and ice. But when the smoke cleared, Simo, seemingly conjured from the frost itself, would fire another shot. He was a master of concealment. He could lie motionless in the snow for hours at temperatures that would kill an ordinary man in 30 minutes. His endurance was beyond human comprehension. At a certain point, the myth of Simo Häyhä became more important than the man himself. For the Finnish soldiers, he became a symbol of invincibility. The phrase "Kala holds" became the rallying cry of the defense, and Simo was the heart of that resistance. Yet, he never saw himself as a hero. In rare moments of rest, he was exceptionally modest, cleaning his rifle, which he affectionately called his tool, and rarely boasting of his successes. When asked the secret of his incredible accuracy, his answer was always short: practice. But behind that one word lay thousands of hours spent in the woods and the icy calm of a man who knew exactly what he was fighting for. The enemy threw more and more resources at him. There were instances where entire units tried to encircle the sector where he was operating, but he always found a way out, gliding away on his skis through thickets that were deemed impassable. One of the most famous stories of his duels involves a Soviet sniper specially brought from the rear to eliminate the White Death. This shooter had already killed several Finnish officers and was considered a master of his craft. For several days, they played a lethal game of cat and mouse in the frozen woods. It was a battle of nerves. Eventually, the Soviet sniper made a fatal mistake. For a fleeting second, the sun caught the lens of his scope. That split second was all Simo needed. His bullet shattered the optics and found its mark. After this encounter, Häyhä's reputation was unshakable. However, war is not just about heroics, it is about the constant proximity of death, which eventually found him as well. On March 6, 1940, just a week before the peace treaty was signed, Simo Häyhä was gravely wounded. During a close-quarters engagement, an explosive bullet struck him in the left jaw. The wound was horrific. The lower half of his face was shattered, and he fell into the snow, bleeding profusely and losing consciousness. The comrades who found him later recalled that half his head was missing, and no one believed he would survive. He was evacuated to a hospital in critical condition and fell into a deep coma. Miraculously, Simo regained consciousness on March 13, the very day the peace treaty was announced. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was a newspaper reporting the end of the war. His face was permanently disfigured, and he would eventually undergo 26 surgeries, with bone for his jaw being taken from his own hip. But he lived. After the war, Simo Häyhä returned to his quiet life. Many expected that a man with over 500 confirmed sniper kills and hundreds more with a submachine gun would be broken or hardened by his experiences. But Simo remained the same humble farmer he had always been. He took up dog breeding and moose hunting. It is said that even the president of Finland, Urho Kekkonen, would sometimes join him for a hunt. Simo never sought the spotlight. When journalists in his later years asked if he felt guilty for taking so many lives, he replied with calm dignity, "I did what I was told to do, as well as I could. It was a war." His modesty was so profound that for a long time, he didn't even realize how famous he had become globally. His home was filled with awards, but he treated them as historical artifacts rather than objects of pride. Simo Häyhä lived a long life, passing away at the age of 96 in 2002 in a veterans' nursing home. His story is not just a chronicle of marksmanship, it is a story of how a small man, armed only with an old rifle and a love for his land, can stand against the gargantuan machinery of war. In popular culture, his image has become legendary, inspiring songs, films, and games. But behind the myth is a real man who valued the silence of the winter forest and the honest work of a farm above all else. He proved that true strength lies not in technology or numbers, but in spirit, patience, and professionalism. He left behind a legacy that snipers around the world still study today. His tactics of camouflage and survival in extreme conditions are considered textbook examples. If you look at his photographs after his injury, you see the eyes of a man who looked death in the face and did not blink. His scarred face became a symbol of the resilience of an entire nation. Finland maintained its independence largely because of men like Simo, who didn't debate geopolitics but simply took up their rifles and went into the freezing woods to protect their homes. Kala did indeed hold, and Simo Häyhä's name is forever etched in the annals of military history. His life teaches us that even in the darkest and coldest times, one person can be a beacon of hope for their people and a chilling terror for those who threaten them. He wasn't a killing machine, he was a protector who used his hunter's talent the only time it was truly necessary for his country. Today, as snow blankets the forests of Karelia, it feels as though somewhere among the white drifts and frosted pines, the invisible shadow of the great marksman still glides, the eternal guardian of the northern woods, whom the world will always remember as the White Death. It is fascinating to note that Simo used a rifle that was already considered obsolete at the time. The mosinnagant design dated back to the late 19th century, yet in his hands, it became a surgical instrument. He knew the ballistics of every bullet, adjusted for air humidity, and judged the wind by the rustle of the needles. His ability to concentrate was phenomenal. In those moments when he lay in ambush, time seemed to stop for him. He became part of the landscape, or rock covered in frost, or just another snowbank. Soviet commanders tried scorched earth tactics to smoke out the snipers, but Simo was always a step ahead. He knew spots not marked on any map and used the terrain in ways no one else could. His legend grew daily. Finnish radio broadcasted frontline reports, and Simo's name was mentioned more and more, lifting the army's morale. For the soldiers on the front lines, he was a mystical figure. Stories circulated that he could hit a bird in flight from hundreds of meters away, without even looking. While these were exaggerations, his real achievements were no less stunning. His injury on March 6th was a shock to the nation. In the hospital, surgeons performed miracles, literally rebuilding his face. After the war, Simo had to relearn how to speak and eat. It was a long, agonizing process, but he faced it with the same stoicism he used in the trenches. His willpower was unbreakable. In peacetime, he shied away from attention, preferring solitude. He often walked in the woods, but without a rifle, enjoying the beauty of the nature he had once defended. Simo Häyhä remained active until his final days. He was a living reminder of the price of freedom. When asked if he considered himself the greatest sniper in history, he would only smile modestly with his asymmetrical grin and change the subject to moose hunting or the weather. In his native Finland, he is a national hero, but to himself, he was always just Simo, a man who loved his land and did everything to keep it free. The path of Simo Häyhä is the path of a warrior who did not choose to take up arms, but once he did, became the best. His story reminds us that true heroes often look very ordinary. They don't wear capes, they wear camouflage stained with snow and dirt. And their deeds are done in silence and solitude. Simo Häyhä is gone, but his legend lives on in tactical manuals, in heavy metal songs, in the memories of veterans, and in the wind that blows through the Karelian forests. Every time the snow falls, it feels as though the White Death is back on duty, reminding us that a country's borders are protected not just by walls, but by people with unbreakable spirits. Reflecting on his life, one realizes that the phenomenon of Simo Häyhä is not just about the body count. He became a David against Goliath. The whole world watched as tiny Finland resisted a giant empire. And Simo was the brightest personification of that struggle. His life after the war is another lesson. He showed that after the most terrible trials, one can return to normalcy, retaining kindness and humanity. He didn't become a hostage to his past or a monument to himself while still alive. He continued to live and enjoy simple things, like the fresh morning air or a successful hunt with friends. This was his second victory, a victory over the war that tried to take not just his face, but his soul. Simo Häyhä left this world at a very old age, surrounded by respect and love. He lived almost a century, seeing his country become one of the most prosperous in the world. And in that prosperity was his contribution, the contribution of a humble farmer, with a mosinnagant who, back in 1939, was not afraid to stand alone against an army. His story will be passed from generation to generation as an example of how courage and professionalism can overcome any circumstances. And when modern snipers go to the range, many remember Simo, striving to achieve at least a fraction of the clarity and precision he possessed. The silence of the Kala forests today holds the memory of those events. If you listen closely, you can imagine the sound of skis on the crust and the distant, barely audible click of a bolt. Simo Häyhä is no longer with us, but his spirit, the spirit of a protector and a master, remains in those woods forever. He proved that one man can indeed be an army if that field is his home and if he holds the truth and a faithful rifle in his hands. His record for confirmed kills may never be broken, but Simo himself would likely have been happy about that. He didn't want wars to repeat. He wanted people to live on their land, grow their bread, and hunt for pleasure. This was his life's main goal, and he achieved it. The story of the White Death is a story of the triumph of human will over impossible odds. It is a tale of how professionalism, multiplied by love for one's country, gives birth to legends that live forever. May his name always be a reminder that a true hero is one who does his duty to the end, whatever the cost, and remains a human being with a large and kind heart. Simo Häyhä will forever remain in our memory as the greatest marksman in history and as a symbol that truth is always stronger than force. As we conclude this story, it is important to mention how vital it is to preserve the memory of such people. In a world where everything changes fast, Simo's example gives us an anchor. It shows that values like loyalty, modesty, and mastery are timeless. His rifle is now kept in a museum as a sacred relic, but the most important memory of him lives in the hearts of people. Every year in Finland, memorial events are held for the Winter War, and Simo's name is always spoken with a special tremor. He became part of the national DNA, a role model for young soldiers. His life is an epic written not with a pen, but with bullets in the snow, an epic of a love for freedom that is stronger than fear and death. We can only guess what he thought during those long hours of waiting in the snowbanks. But one thing we know for sure. He thought about the fact that behind him were his family, his village, and his country. And that gave him the strength not to feel the cold and not to know doubt. Eternal memory to the great son of Finland, the man legend, Simo Häyhä. His legacy continues to inspire. Today, when we study the history of World War I, the figure of Simo Häyhä stands apart. He wasn't a general moving divisions on a map. He was a soldier in a trench, or rather, a snow hole, but his contribution to the overall victory cannot be overstated. He showed that the moral spirit of a fighter is a powerful weapon. The Red Army, despite its colossal advantage, encountered something their commanders did not expect: the fierce resistance of every single individual. And Simo was the edge of that resistance. His story teaches us to respect the opponent, but never to surrender to them. It teaches us that knowing your land and your roots gives an undeniable advantage. Simo Häyhä also became a symbol of the importance of being a professional. He didn't just shoot, he studied the physics of the shot, the anatomy of the target, the psychology of the enemy. He was a scientist of war, if one could put it that way. His camouflage methods became classics of sniper craft. But even more than his technical skills, his spiritual resilience is striking. Returning to a normal life after what he endured is perhaps his greatest feat. He didn't become aggressive, he didn't withdraw into himself, he remained open to the world, as much as his condition allowed. This speaks of an incredibly healthy and strong psyche, tempered by the harsh northern life. When we look at modern conflicts, we see that the sniper's role is still incredibly important. But now they have thermal imagers, laser rangefinders, and high-precision, computer-controlled rifles. Simo had none of that. Only his eyes, his hands, and an old mechanical rifle. And that makes his achievements even more incredible. He was a master of the analog era in the highest sense. His example tells us that no technology can replace human skill and intuition. In the end, Simo Häyhä's story is about peace, not war. He fought so that the war would end sooner. He killed so that his loved ones could live. In this tragic paradox of war, Simo found his path and walked it to the end. Today, we can only thank him for the example of courage he left us. May his story remind us of the value of peace and the sacrifices people are willing to make for their freedom. The White Death became a legend, but for us, he remains Simo the modest Finn who simply knew how to do his job very well. In this greatness is a simplicity available to anyone ready to work and believe in their cause. The story is over, but the echo of his shot still rings through history, reminding us of what a true hero is. Simo Häyhä, the man who became the snow, the wind, and the history of his country. His name is synonymous with loyalty and mastery, and it will live as long as the forests stand on the banks of the Kala, and as long as people remember what it means to defend their home. It was a long journey from a farm in Ratchavy to the heights of world fame, but Simo walked it without losing himself, and that is the most important achievement of his long and amazing life. We remember, we respect, we are inspired. Simo Häyhä, legend that became eternity. This story is a tribute not only to him, but to all those who stood in those bitter frosts to defend their ideals. Simo was their voice, their invisible shield. And as long as we tell these stories, the feat of these people will not be forgotten. Let this be another brick in the wall of memory for a great man whose life was as pure and harsh as the Finnish winter. We close this page of history, but the image of the small man in the white suit will forever remain in our imagination as a symbol of the invincibility of the human spirit. Rest in peace, Simo. Your hunt is over, but your example is eternal. Your forests are calm, your country is free, and that is the best reward for a soldier like you. Every time we face difficulties, we can think of you and find a piece of your calm and determination. For if one man could stand against an entire army in a frozen hell, we too can overcome our obstacles. That is the true power of legends. They give us the strength to live and fight in our own time. Thank you, Simo. Your story is a light in the winter night, pointing the way to courage and honor. We will never forget the White Death, who in truth brought life to his homeland. Kala holds, and the memory of you will hold forever. This was the story of Simo Häyhä, the man who changed the world with a single shot and remained both the most ordinary and the greatest man on earth. Info.